Hi everybody. Did anyone see this presentation before, because it was also visible after test virus 2 years ago? Anyone? All right, good. Makes things easier because I changed it anyway. So my name is Gustav. I started my career, or maybe I'll just, yeah, that's about me. The last point is very important, cats. Yeah, well, I'm a cat lover, so I'm not a dog person, but I also like dogs. I started my career in IT in 2004. Back then, I was very lucky. I got a job because back in my hometown of Szczecin, it wasn't very easy to find a job, like a programmer. And the first story I wanted to share is that back then my friends who were doing car wash back when they were still at the university, they were earning twice as much as I did because IT wasn't very well paid. So I think it was around 300-400 euros gross that I was earning as a programmer straight out of the university. And throughout my career, I worked in many industries, in many roles, including the role of a test manager, which I hope I'll put some focus on this in this presentation, although the presentation itself is more about transformation. And I'll start now. So, first thing is worth to remember, we as engineers, we have a very unique I'd say set of skills. One, we're all artists because we are working in a complex domain. We rarely know how things will look like when it's going to be put into production. On the other hand, in that art, because we work in a creative industry, so you might say that the graphical designer or a person that's coming from business with an idea is the true artist, but let's say there's very few people in that area that would be actually able to create an application that meets the demand or the vision of a person. It's more like, imagine your business is a person that comes to you and says, I would like to have a portrait of myself made, and then you as the people who actually write stuff and create stuff, you come in and you say, okay, I'm going to do it this way. Does it match your vision or not? And the other set of skills is that we're all very pragmatic. So on one hand, we're artists. On the other hand, we're scientists and engineers, because we work in an area where we have to create something. And this, in general, this conflict between the artful design, where we would like to express ourselves through our work, versus what actually is required for the person that's getting the end result from us, it creates a lot of challenges. And because we're artists, sometimes we try to push that whatever our vision was should be the end product. And then the other people come in, no, I don't like this works wrong, or this is designed wrongly, or there are too many bugs, etc., etc. And more or less this presentation will be of how to try to meet the both sides, like the artist side and the engineering side, and also how this works in an environment that generally has a lot of inertia, where changing the way we work is much harder, even if it sounds reasonable. So there will be some things about being calm, being patient, putting a lot of sweat and work and effort. There will be some tears because not everything can be done, or sometimes it can be done a bit later. And we don't like that. As I said, we're artists, so if somebody comes to us and says, no, it can't be done that way, we'll not feel appreciated. At least I won't. I'm not sure how about you. And yeah, the last thing is about enterprise monsters. To be honest, I've worked on a few greenfield projects. Me personally, I don't like greenfield projects because you don't know life until you worked on a legacy project that's enterprise and on scale. I mean, it's great. I mean, if you can do stuff right from the beginning the way you want it, whether this is a new application or it's a testing framework or it's a new testing approach, it's great, but the true life is in enterprise, and your code becomes legacy usually faster than you think. Some definitions that I've heard, your code becomes legacy after you finished writing it, and it's already legacy. And legacy is not a bad word, because legacy basically means what we leave for the world. And what we leave for the world and how to make it better will be on the next slides. Anyone in the room heard of DevOps movement? Yeah, there's a few people. For you that hadn't heard it, DevOps started, I believe, with Flickr around 2008, if I remember correctly. Sorry, 2010. And they said something like, okay, so instead of putting focus a lot on preparing our software before it goes to production, we're gonna make it easier to deploy it more often to production. And they had this famous thing with 10 deployments a day, which people thought is crazy. It will definitely impact the quality. Their products will basically flip over and they will not work. Well, it seems like the people who are the critics of this approach, they're still, yeah, so when I was doing a review for my presentation, it was really hard to find critical observations about the DevOps movement. But, well, the critics were wrong, because right now DevOps is gaining a lot of traction, a lot of attention, specifically because it works well with legacy, enterprise, and complex approaches, where your business expects you to produce a new picture every, well, sometimes every day, or sometimes every hour. Famously, I think Amazon is doing a few thousand deploys a day. I don't want to be talking about Amazon because I'm not a great fan of Bezos and the way this company works, but they've been successful, especially with the service approach and the DevOps approach. And if you see there's a lot of text on this slide, don't worry, just read it through. I'll be talking in the meantime. This quote is from a State of DevOps report, which is an organization of researchers that was created back in 2013 or 2014, where they wanted to find scientific evidence. So instead of, I still haven't seen scientific evidence, proper scientific evidence for Agile. But for DevOps, there is an organization that's called DevOps Research and Architecture, short DORA, that is doing research across multiple, I think it's few thousands of organizations, from startups to extremely huge investment banks. And they're checking what works and what doesn't work in the DevOps movement. All right, I'll move on. So that was my introduction to Agile. And on top of this, when I was, I think, my first introduction to enterprise Agile was in one of the major British banks. And yeah, so nobody knew how we should exactly work. So yeah, so we are Agile now. From this moment on, we're basically going to work in an Agile mode. And then, by the way, there's this SDLC that you need to follow. So there are 24 steps from project initiation or even business case down to the maintenance, out of which 24 points, half a point was about development, delivery, and quality. Everything else was basically to produce tons of documentation, and developers were just supposed to write code and make sure it was well documented, and they have to write it fast. This clash between Agile, Waterfall, and the strange approach to creating a lot of documentation that nobody works created a culture, and we need to remember DevOps is culture. So before DevOps, there was a culture of enterprise, which basically meant everything you create will be based on a very heavy process, and that's why the applications that were being built, they weren't built for the fact that they should be fast, easily changeable, lightweight, because the market will be moving much faster than our application can change. It was created to make sure that it meets the definition of all of the documentation steps. And I know there's no pun intended, but I'm also not a great fan of ISTQB approach to testing, because anything that's process heavy in today's world, although there are applications where, for example, if you're talking about operating system upgrades or things like that, where those approaches work. But in the most, especially startup or online experiences, you have to be able to move a lot faster, and more people are getting used to that. You know, every day there'll be a new feature, or there'll be a feature that specializes for something else. But if I would be the person that gets OS updates or application updates on my mobile, which is extremely annoying, more than once a month, or if I would be getting them like 50 times a day, I would probably just uninstall that, or I would find anything that doesn't force me to do it. So, moving on. Before we start thinking about any transformation, there's like few points that are pretty important to remember. I'll try to talk you through here. And this is coming from my experience. So when does this thinking started for me? Back in, that was 2014, when I was with another, this time Swiss investment bank, and I was spending yet another weekend on some production issue, or I was spending yet another weekend on a release that goes wrong and goes for 24 hours, and you can't really roll back. I mean, there are always rollback procedures in place, but how will you roll back a database that has live trading data? Full rollback will take probably 8 hours just to load everything from the restore point and from all of the backups. But when you took that snapshot, there was probably already a day missing, so it was always roll forward. And this meant an extreme, and I love that effort. I mean, the adrenaline goes like this. You say, okay, I can fix this, and I'm really motivated to do it for the first 5 or 6 times. When it's the 25th time, you're probably less motivated to work in that place. And, you know, you roll forward, you basically do a lot of cowboy coding, a lot of hacking. You make sure you don't call your testers, because they would never allow this to go to production. You make sure that you find out some bullshit. You're going to tell your stakeholders, like, this went wrong, but we fixed it. And then you try to find some ways on how to just change database configuration, so I don't need to tell too many people that we changed some code, so we don't have to push it. And I was in that place, and I thought, 25th, 26th, 27th time, overtime. Sometimes, I think the longest I worked was 3 days straight with 4 hours sleep in between, with some issues. There must be a better way to approach to this. There must be a better way. It can't be just that every time we only test at the end, or every time we just figure out that the requirement is wrong at the end, or we figure out that somebody wrote some code which looks great and even follows the clean code, but it only supports a specific scenario, and then a user wakes up somewhere in the middle of the night and says, but I do it differently, nobody ever asked me. So this got me thinking, and the books I'm going to reference and all of this is in my presentation at the end. What I did, I started looking how other people do it, and the first thing I found was actually from manufacturing industry. I know some people might say manufacturing industry is no way close to software development, because the whole lean movement, the manufacturing is more or less well defined. You can find a lot of examples where the process is predictable, and you can't really apply lean to software development because it's a complex domain, so you don't know what's going to be next step in the process. One of the first early approaches to that was Agile movement. So Agile was based on lean, was based on what Toyota did. I found a book, The Goal, by Eliyahu Goldratt, and this was about creating, to drive yourself through measurements to improvement. I tried to introduce this approach to the company, but there's another key point that you need to remember about. If your boss is not on board, if your business is not on board, it's going to be extremely hard to introduce something bottom up. In 2016, all changed because our boss has changed, and the new boss that came in, he was very open to those ideas. In fact, he even pushed for them. So I had to wait 2 years and get from this 26th overtime to 55th overtime or even more, until I was able to get to start improving stuff, okay? It took a while. So this is where the patience comes in, this is where the tears come in, this is where, you know, basically being motivated that you would like to see this change through. So this is the hard part. But the hard part paid off. And it paid off, and this is more or less a few simple points on the things that we followed. So set reasonable goals. We didn't say that from three months ahead or 5 months ahead or 6 months ahead we're going to be in elite. No. We set the goals that we say, okay, this year we want to do this, next something else. So first year, all we wanted to do is basically get from our quarterly release cycle to 6 weeks release cycle. Then after a year, this is what I presented in 2018 on Test Varus. Then from 2018 to 2019, we said we want to go down to a weekly release cycle, and then the next goal was on-demand releases. Expect slow progress, and the progress was truly slow. So if you're working with the legacy software enterprise applications, they have a history, they have character, they rarely have documentation. And because all of us, I changed my jobs. Within 14 years, I changed it 9 times. We do change our jobs often, so we come in as new joiners, we gather some knowledge. Sometimes we even document it, that's great. This documentation becomes outdated within 3 months. And we come in and we rarely understand what we're doing, and once we become good, we usually look for another opportunity. Which also brings me back to that point about patience, right? Once you reach that point of an expert, it's really, really useful for yourself as a person, because I always say you work for yourself and other people, at least in our industry, that you set yourself a goal, like I would call it a stretch goal, that I will try to change something before I will change the company. And the progress was slow, so because we had the support of our boss, so it took us like 6 to 8 months just to stabilize the 6 weeks process. And some of you might not like it. One of our first steps was we're gonna reduce our manual regression from 3,500 or something like that, manual test cases down to 100 maybe, and introduce more exploratory testing. We'll do our automated regression, we're basically going to throw away because it was not worth it. And we're going to push a lot more on developers, but more about that later. Then, so I'm not sure if any of you heard of a strangler pattern and peeling an onion. So this is the approach that in most of the applications works. So you first find what actually what the other parts of or all the parts of your application are doing. You find this is what you call the onion layers. Okay, so whatever is easy to peel at the beginning, this is most likely your first step to do it. Then the strangler pattern is you peel that onion and you start building something new, like think of it that you're going to plant some other plant around the onion. So you peel the onion, and then the new plant starts growing, and at some point the new plant eats the onion, or there's very little onion left, and that's like the ideal approach to introducing new stuff. Then think who you would like to have in your team, and this is really a key point. I always fight when people say I want to work with the best people, I want to hire the best people. And sorry, to me that's bullshit, because you want to work with the right people. So I remember the story of Real Madrid, I think it was 2005, they had the most expensive team and they couldn't win a single game. So it's not superstars that help you to win. It's the people that actually want to get themselves on board. So look for like-minded people, open internal conversations, and make sure, which I'll tell you in a moment about hiring, who you would like to have in your team, and also create some simple rules of the people you would like to hire. And believe me, one of the rules we had is that our testers are not to test software. They were there to maintain the quality of the product and to spread the quality-driven culture. It was a huge shift to a lot of people we had in the organization, because they were used to a tester comes in and he's there to write the unit test, write the automation test or write the manual test. No, this was not their focus. Their focus was to discuss with the developers, discuss with the product. Well, in some cases you will not have a product team, but you will have business people that you can talk to understand what they really want and what's the goal to be achieved, not what are the acceptance criteria. No, the acceptance criteria would naturally come out of the business goals and the purpose the application does, but it's in itself, it wasn't the most important point. And this was the approach that actually started to drive our change. So think on how to measure your progress. What we did, we started from creating a simple, let's call it KPI. Now I would call it a predictive or a leading metric of defect leakage to production. Before, we had something that was called number of test cases executed per day, which is the worst and the shittiest metric I ever seen. And every tester had 12 test cases a day to execute. So you can imagine, for a quarterly cycle, our system, when I was leaving, we were not using that system. It's called Rally. It's really rare. I haven't seen it anywhere else. It had around 6,000 test cases and probably 1,000 defects raised for every single cycle. The problem with that was that it wasn't bringing any additional value, because one, developers will never be able to fix it, and the quantity doesn't equal quality, which I think you all will agree with me about. So what I created was a defect leakage, which was then changed to amount of defects in production, but we started from 99%, and this 99% red, extremely huge red number was sent to all of the business stakeholders to say, we transparently say we're shit, okay? And this started driving other conversations, because people couldn't go and hide the facts anymore. They had to go and start to pay interest. And this went to even more senior people, and some people in the sales would say, aha, that's why that's why our clients are complaining so much about your operations product, because it's creating too many issues. It's not good enough. And we also added some other metrics, like, and I'm not a great fan of saying that, but it works, that the developers should have at least 60% of unit test coverage on their code. This made, so that simple thing made testers' life a lot easier, because this pushed part of the responsibility for quality on developers naturally. So if a person that was responsible for quality culture, which is the tester, would go to that developer, they would have a simple point, like, have you created unit tests? And have you made that? And if we wouldn't meet our quality gate, we could argue that we shouldn't be pushing this product to production. And also, the amount of defects dropped from 1,000 a quarter to probably 50 or 60 per quarter. It was like 30 raised every 6 weeks, because people could actually start concentrating on quality and not on the stuff that's, well, how do I make sure that my manager doesn't shout at me because I haven't tested enough? And the last point I already mentioned about, which is public relations, because public relations is key to enabling. So my role in all this was to go and tell senior people why, and then at some point where we had enough people that bought into this model, to go and talk on themselves, which also helped them to promote themselves in the organization. And one of those examples is Tomek Olszewski, who couldn't come in today. So when I left, he actually took over my role as head of Poland in my previous organization because he was involved in this whole process, and he naturally could come in because he knew all of the stakeholders, they knew him and they trusted him. So this is the aspect of transparency, which through quality and through making things transparent and through changing them, you can help yourself as a person to develop. And I'm not saying that getting promoted as a manager should be goal for all of us, but it just proves that we also had a few people that changed their attitude towards testing and quality. It was no longer a repetitive work. It was work that's actually worth something and that helps you to meet people and helps you to be a part of a team instead of just being the person that comes in and complains this doesn't work. Which, when I started as a test manager, this was my main job. Basically, go to all of the people and say, this doesn't work, I will not push this. So whoever was the delivery manager at that time, I loved my boss, but he would call me and say, no, you're wrong. We have to push this because we already committed this to business. So what can we do? Oops. I think we lost the screen. We had a bit of a technical issue with this cable, but it was supposed to be replaced for the next presentation. Yeah. So, and there are some things that you shouldn't do, okay? So I've seen a few crazy approaches to people come in and say, oh, we should rewrite all that because it's crap. The one problem with this approach is that once you've established that you want to rewrite something, you will basically end up with one single problem. It won't work because legacy and enterprise, as I said, this thing has a character, okay? And the character means there's a lot of things that will be very unintuitive, and there will be sometimes, in my case, it was 21 years of history of a software product. Two, you have to convince your users to start using a new system. I'm not sure if you've ever been involved in any new product integration, like a software integration engineer, that you go on site, user was using version A of your product, but you say the version B is much better, you should use version B, and you have people coming in, I like version A better. Oh, but you can do things better in version B. Yeah, but I don't need it. Or it doesn't work, or there are bugs. Or the most classical example is that I remember I started a very small company, a Danish company, which I also have a few funny stories about. But I came in and there was one script, like literally one file with everything in it. It was in Visual Basic, it had over 1 megabyte. It wasn't a big company. It was the whole company internal system. It was HTML, JavaScript, SQL, VB code, everything in one file. I started rewriting this to something more reasonable. We came up with a more reasonable approach, and people came in and said, we won't be using that because in the previous system we could list all of our invoices on the screen, which basically was do an SQL query and display something that you scan through for the next 2 minutes. But we could print it. I say, in the new system, you won't need the printing function. Yes, but we prefer to print it. And this was, and this was like that. I mean, we didn't have, I didn't knew much about building quality culture. I didn't knew much about, I was very new to everything. And didn't knew that I should have spoken to my users. But what I'm trying to say, if you're trying to rewrite stuff, it's highly likely that you will lose all that effort. And it's the same what I've seen in testing frameworks. Back at my previous company, a huge Swiss investment bank, I think we removed the testing frameworks 4 times. And every time we removed it, we said, okay, the next framework will be better. Never was. Okay, because it wasn't fit for purpose, but we learned this much later. The first point is very important. Don't be afraid to change things. Things get to shitty place if nobody points a finger and says this should be changed. I know I've been a manager and I was discouraging people myself, so I shouldn't be probably, but I'm also partially fault about most of the approaches made by managers saying, well, maybe we shouldn't put focus on that. But if somebody is continuously and very persistently making a point, these things should be changed, and provide some sort of solution, so they don't come in and just say, we should change things because it doesn't work. This is not constructive. Okay, so that's what you learn. You should always provide how this should change, even if it won't be used. Your manager will see this through as a better proposal than just basically complaining. There's another thing, maintenance cost. So anything you develop has a maintenance cost. This was actually another metric. We started measuring how much it costs. And one of our senior engineers, whom I like very much at my previous employer, who was very persistent and very opinionated, and he was right. Our maintenance costs, he found some servers, like virtual servers that we're using, actually we weren't using for 3 years, so there's like 100 servers that were just lying around, not used for anything. They were just ordered in case, and they were generating something like $100,000 of maintenance cost every year, because somebody thought at some point that they will be required. Right now, I'm in a more or less cloud-based, not cloud native yet, but in a cloud-conscient organization, so it's much easier. But that's really important. And a lot of people will tell you, oh, don't worry about it, we'll worry about it later. No. So, because this also impacts our salaries and bonuses, because in most companies, the IT department is a cost center. It shouldn't be, but it is. Next thing is automate blindly, and this point is why we decided that we'll remove the automation. Because if you have 100% automation coverage, you have hundreds of tests that cover your application UI, and then you have hundreds or thousands of tests that cover the interfaces. One, it increases maintenance cost. Two, is it really worth it? Does it provide the value? Do you really need to do it? How much? Ask yourselves questions. Do we really need this to make sure that the product quality is met? Isn't it easier to have in your organization 2 or 3 exploratory manual testers that are just going to try to go through the whole user journey and see what might go wrong, because they'll be the specialists to break things. And and I don't want to be sounding negative here, but some of the best quality engineers I ever worked with, there were people that were very good with breaking things. So this was the top skill that I wanted, right? I didn't want someone who can execute a manual test case. Come to me and tell me how you can break this stuff, because I can't think about it. Outsourcing was another problem. So the more outsourcing partners in one project, the more conflicts, the more politics. We had 6, which I'm going to tell you about in a sec anyway. I think Mateusz, it isn't working either. Okay, who tested this? All right. Rebuilding we've covered, and 100% testing coverage we've covered. 100% testing coverage is not what means that the product has high quality. The best measurement of quality for me, although it's not very... Okay, that's a bit annoying. The best measurement of product quality is customer end user and customer satisfaction, but it's not easily quantifiable. So you need to have some leading measures, which I'm going to explain at the end of the presentation to basically do it. Okay, so this another very important slide here, because which you can't see, but I can see, so I'll try to explain. So the next thing I'm hearing is that if you change your organization to move faster, we will lose work-life balance. So we'll actually be working longer hours, or business will start coming in and telling me, okay, we need to have this tomorrow, we need to have this in few hours, and people will be spending a lot of overtime. That's not what I experienced myself. Once we've changed our organization to be faster paced and more lightweight on some of the stuff. We actually have, I shouldn't say this, I haven't left my previous company because I was bored, but I was bored because there was so little stuff coming our way. Things were basically working, okay? And this is something, it's not very motivating for an engineer, because I think engineer, being an artist, being a scientist, you need to have a problem, right? If you don't have problems, you will not be able to motivate yourself. Somebody can come in, oh, you're great, you're doing great, very positive messages. Okay, but where's the problem? Okay, where's the problem that I could fix as an engineer? And now, the slide that I had here is from State of DevOps report from 2016, which basically says that organizations that introduce those methods, the employees are more happy. In general, more than twice happier than the other organizations, and they are twice more likely to recommend the organization to their peers. And it's called something like Employee Net Promoter Score that can be measured. So organizations that focus on a bit more heavy processes and not on the, in a sense, DevOps attitude, they fall short. So the biggest fuck up I had, again, the small Danish company, 10 people in it, 3 developers, 2 sysadmins, well, 0 testers, so it's like, there isn't a better company for a developer to start creating pet projects. We had loads of pet projects and lots of pet, not business value driven fact. We bought a new toy, it was ReSharper. And ReSharper started suggesting to us that we should beautify our code. And was excellent. I mean, like, you could spend days saying, oh, I can do this better. Yeah, right, let's click this and click through. The 2 developers that worked with me, they decided to optimize our code for invoicing. And 3 days later, they submitted their resignations. Well, it was money driven, so let's not be afraid to say it out there. Especially in Poland in those days, it was very easy to get an offer that was 80% of your 80% more or 180% more of your current salary. We should have a separate discussion on how people motivate through money, but in general, Poland was somewhere here back then, and the point where money doesn't motivate anymore was somewhere here. I think we're closer here right now. So we should focus on personal development more. And yeah, well, they left. We had our first invoicing period right after that, and we ran our invoices, and 10 invoices went wrong, horribly wrong. One of those invoices went to one of our clients that resigned off the services. Our bosses, because in general we had a stable business model that meant we shouldn't motivate our clients to contact us, because the more they contact us, they will see how much worse our service is compared to other companies. And it was, right? If this company still exists today, it still has the web page that they built in 2007, and it's still running the same business model where you have, for example, you can select 500 megabytes for hosting. Wow, right? And it costs you, like, I don't know, €20 a month, which is probably you get more from free from WordPress. So yeah, and I had a discussion with my bosses. I had to go and explain to them, right, what went wrong, how this can be prevented the next time, and how are we going to how are we going to fix the financial problem, because there was like €1,200 financial loss to the company. Well, all right, sorry, it seems like I need to speed up a bit. So I'll skip the point on on hiring the right people. So this is my approach to hiring the right people, and it's less about the skills, as you'll see. It's more about the attitude, and it's more about how people think. Because if you hire those people, it's very highly likely that instead of saying, oh, I need to find another job, they will be thinking, how can we change our reality? And I highly encourage everyone to review their own personal priorities to be more focused on how do I change my personal priorities instead of how do I look for another job. And what I'm seeing, this is more and more what's being expected from the fun companies. So it's worth to review and understand how will you work that way. I told you a bit about the enterprise piece, but I love this picture. It's exactly what's happening when you're being told we have to fix our legacy software. This is, I talked this through. What I wanted to point, this is ISTQB. 200 emails a month. Please sign this off. Please sign this off. Please sign this off. I didn't know what I was signing off. I was just signing off. Shitty production stability, defect shaming. I love those meetings. You get to a meeting, there's 40 developers, and you say, who's going to be fixing that? Who introduced that bug? Actually, the name comes from another of my friends who was running a similar meeting in IBM, but I think back then they had 200 developers in like room like this. And imagine the loss of time, like who broke this? Who broke this? Who's going to be fixing it? Worked, right? It's an excellent tool because if you shame people, you create a problem for an engineer that he wants to fix. Merge, 2 weeks have a working build, yeah, so that's more or less we discussed everything here. That's what happened. Okay, so my new boss came in and say, no, we can't work that way. Who wants to lead the change? And well, I actually raised my hand because I wanted, and I wanted for a longer period of time. But we also had some other things to change. Oh, sorry, and Tomek also did, the one that I've mentioned before. But we also had a lot of like our business relationships, etc., etc. In the end, he ended up dividing this. And what's clear here is push, which means be very persistent, and take no prisoners, which means not in a negative way, so you shouldn't be killing people or shouldn't be shaming people publicly that they haven't did it. But take no prisoners means if somebody comes in with criticism of your idea, be constructive. So if you don't like this, what else do you suggest? What else do you suggest we do? Because we can't work in a way where we're spending nights on defects and we never deliver on time, or etc., etc. Yeah, so again, State of DevOps report, you can read it later. That's the key point. And in our previous organization, in current organization as well, the testers were the people responsible for spreading the quality culture, not for the testing itself. Which also probably meets with some of the talks I heard over the years. What's the vision of being a tester in the future? That's the vision. You don't have to know how to code to do it. You're just basically the person that comes to everyone and say, couldn't we do it a better way? Or what do you understand as quality? And a lot of responses you're going to get like less defects or you know, just being on time, etc., etc. No, that's not what we define as quality. What we define as quality is what we agreed internally. And also, how does it impact the performance of the company, the performance of the product, and satisfaction of the customers. And it works with this approach. This is where I finish. We talked through this more or less. There's also very nice 300K USD per annum savings with all of the services that we didn't need. Well, I haven't seen even like 1% of this money. I would be very glad, but again, this was not the reason why I left my previous employer, just to be clear. Minimal manual testing, mainly exploratory. That's very important because no other person than human can do this. I mean, I've seen a lot of scripts, a lot of frameworks. I'm even also a bit interested in accessibility testing right now. So accessibility testing is probably the best example of where personal manual exploratory testing works a lot better than a tool, because you can be 100% accessible according to the tools, and the page is not accessible at all. And another important point, stop talking about testing automation. Build pipeline. The difference is, if you have build pipeline, you create everything that you need, like a proper lean value stream. that you have unit tests, you have a build for developer, you have some security testing embedded, you have some vulnerabilities, then whatever you want to add from anyone, you automate this and it becomes your build pipeline. It doesn't just check quality. Every build pipeline basically ships a deliverable product. And that's the difference from testing automation. Yeah, and a warning at the end, and I like Niccolò Machiavelli, but not because he wrote The Prince, but he's being quoted in a lot of books that are related to transformations, and specifically this quote, and I experienced it myself, that you will not get a lot of support if you are trying to change things. Because we as humans, we don't like stepping out of what works, even if it's wrong. So just be mindful of this. And last slide, I know Mateusz, we're probably a bit over time. Last slide, this is DORA. This is my current interest, and this is the metrics that I'm currently introducing that are very good for driving DevOps cultures in the company. You'll see that at least 3 of them that are related to quality, availability, time to restore, and change fail. And there's a lot of material if you would like to read about this approach. And DevOps approach is more about creating a culture of continuous delivery, including quality, including everything. And that's all, thank you.